I'd like, if Member Papalia is willing, for Member Papalia to read the.
I'd rather not. I thought I'd sent you. We had someone else do it. I appreciate it.
Oh, okay. Okay. The agenda is posted, and I'm going to pull up the HTML packet, and I will read it myself unless someone else wants to volunteer. The City of Albany recognizes that we occupy the land originally protected by the Confederated Villages of the Legion. We acknowledge the genocide that took place on these lands and must make strides to repay the moral debt that is owed to this indigenous people, specifically the Ohlone tribe. We thank them for their contributions, which have transformed our community and will continue to bring forth growth and unity. The City of Albany commits to sustaining ongoing relationships with the tribe and together build a better future for all that we now make this their home. Agenda item number 2, that's a roll call, and we need to see who's here.
All right. Member Papalia?
Here.
Member Priven?
Here.
Vice Chair Trainer?
Here.
And Chair Kerr?
I'm here. And then we have the approval of the minutes, draft minutes from our last meeting, February 2nd, 2022. Do I have a motion to approve, or any comments that we want to clear up before we have a motion to approve?
I move to approve. If no comments.
I'll second.
We roll, Paul.
Okay. So Member Papalia?
Yes.
And Member Priven?
Yes.
And Vice Chair Trainer?
Yes.
And Chair Kerr?
Yes. So the minutes are approved, seconded, called by Papalia and seconded by Trainer. Announcements. Any announcements from staff or committee members that we want to have at this point in the meeting? Hearing none, we will move to item number 4 on our agenda, which is public comment. I wanted to just make a brief note for the public and anyone participating in this meeting now or later, that we have acknowledged and received a letter that we will attach to future agenda from a retired Albany police worker. And that letter reflects on some of the good work that this committee is doing, and encourages us to be particularly mindful of the retirement and the pension concerns that he has as a retired member of the police department here in Albany. So that was intended to be attached, but unfortunately we don't have an attachment right now. But we do want to acknowledge Lieutenant Bone in his comments and appreciate his support and his ongoing monitoring and watching what's going on here. So now turn to the public. Is there anybody in the public that we should acknowledge or recognize? Are there any public participants in the meeting? Not at the moment. Okay. So we have riveted our way through items 1 through 4, and we are now on presentations. Fiscal year 2021 third quarter update. Do you want to share your screen, Heather, to sort of walk us through what we've got? I know we want to finish by 10 tonight. I want to finish by 10 tonight. So let's go.
All right. So for tonight, I figured I would go through what is presented sheet by sheet and explain why it's presented this way and how it's intended to be used. The quarterly updates are to update now the Financial Advisory Committee, but originally council, on where the city was compared to the original budget, and So the first page is formatted this way to match the audit. So when you look at our audits, the revenues and the expenditures are broken down like this, where the revenues are by category and the expenditures are by department. So when you go back through, if you wanted to compare the audit to the quarterly updates or the budget, you can use this sheet to do that. Now, there may be slight differences based on transfers in, because some transfers are not necessarily part of the operating budget. They're done based on year-end numbers or additional council appropriations. So they aren't included in the budget, but they do show up in the audit. And when I do the budget, I very clearly call those out so that you can go back and tie the numbers on this sheet to the numbers in your in the audits for the city. This should tie back directly to the adopted budget, and then this is by quarter. When I was presenting these, I originally had just this sheet and all of the detail, and there was a consensus that that council at the time wanted a summary by department. And so that's where these pages came about. So this shows expenses broken down by salaries and benefits, and then all other expenses, as well as revenues by department. And this is just a summary by department. It's a little bit more detailed than the audit overview, but it's still just a summary. In addition to being for the council, these reports are really for the public. And for the most part, once you start getting into too much detail, you start to lose people. So these reports are based on best practice, and my professional give and take over the last few years of what people have wanted and what people seem to be overwhelmed with. So that's really how these reports came about. So then when we continue to go through and you start to get into the detail, the salaries and wages, this includes, so all of these categories, and even what look to be detail, are really still, we internally track these at a much more granular level. So salaries and wages include categories for full-time salaries, for part-time salaries, for overtime, and then benefits. Insurance includes medical, dental, life insurance. Retirement includes PERS, as well as the 457 contributions that the city makes for a handful of employees. Taxes are FICA, Medicare, and I think that's it. So other expenses, dues, memberships, publications, and trainings. Trainings is a good one to explain how internally we track trainings in regards to the cost of the training itself, the cost of bringing in a trainer. So instead of sending someone to a training, how much does it cost to bring someone into the city to do a training for a group? For example, our sexual harassment trainings, that's often we bring somebody in and they, train the group. We don't send everyone individually. We break it out by travel. So how much are we spending for the training itself versus sending someone to that training? And those are things that we track internally so that we can make good administrative decisions and see, where we're really getting the best bang for our buck. But at the council level, they don't necessarily, want to know, how much are you spending on this versus this or versus this. We just know here's how much you're spending to train our staff. Administrative and office expenses, same thing. Professional services. Internally, especially for finance, I can tell you, we track the cost of the parcel tax administration. We track our grant expenditures. We have a grant consultant, so that's a professional service. We track our audit services separately. So I don't list those out, but that is something that we do internally. Now, all of that internal information is available upon request. However, this report is really just to give an overview of where we are. The detail can often be overwhelming. And so you'll see this same type of report done in other cities. They don't give, granular detail. They roll up into these categories so that, you can see where the money is being spent, but not necessarily exactly how we account for it. Now, if someone is doing, it wants to look into a certain thing, for example, the policing task force recently really was interested in where exactly is the money going, we can definitely pull that information. But it's not something that the general public is normally looking for. And again, it just gets overwhelming for someone who really wants to know or wants to learn some of this information, but is going to look at a much longer report and be like, all right, no, I'm not doing that. Now, in the detail, we do have revenues as well. They are still at the lump sum category. Let's go down to the non-departmental. That's where most of our revenues are. It is still only broken down by category. The only thing that I really break out is where our transfers in come from. And that's because our pension tax is fairly significant. And so it's important to note, where that money's coming from. I do the same thing in the public works where I break out what special revenue source that money's coming from so that it can tie back to the parcel taxes. Now, these items we've broken out the big hitters. So obviously property tax. Property tax is where we bring the most of our money. So that's one category. Sales and use taxes are, another category. And then this is broken out by what the audit has. If I was to do this, I probably would have put current service charges and licenses and permits in one category because these are small numbers. We don't, in general, I wouldn't break out something this small, but I want you guys to be able to tie it back to the audit. Again, just like with the expenses, more detail is available for most of these. And so upon request, it can be provided, but it's not necessarily something that the person who is just looking at the quarterly report is looking for. In my report, so that's what this report is. That's, why the report is set up the way it is and all of that. So let's go back up to the top and we'll talk about where we are this year. So as it's stated in the memo that I sent to the committee, we get the majority of our property taxes in the first quarter and then in the end of April, actually. So we just got the second big amount of property taxes. But since that's in Q4, you don't see that here. So it looks like we're behind on collecting. But as I said in my report, we generally collect about 40% of all of what we're going to consider revenue for the year in the Q4. A lot of that has to do with the transfers in. You'll notice, transfers in, we've budgeted 4 million and we only have 700,000. A huge transfer in is our pension tax override. And that I can't calculate until the end of the year because it's based on actual pension costs. So that one happens more for fiscal year end. Then our expenditures, we're pretty much on track. When you look back at where we were compared to budget in prior years, we're getting much closer to being fully to this number being 75%. So we're budgeting much closer to where we're going to end up year over year. Historically, we've recognized a surplus, which is great, but we can't necessarily continue to count on that, especially when we're budgeting for a $1.7 million deficit. I just recently made the $1 million additional contribution that the council authorized for our CalPERS pension liability, which is awesome. We're working towards paying down that unfunded liability, but it only brought our next year payment down by, $100,000. So, when you look at how we originally, a few years ago, had our actuarial study done, and they were saying that our annual payment is going to go up to like $5 million a year by 2030, we're making a small dent in that. But that payment is still going to increase significantly, even though we're paying that down as we can. And then the other thing we need to think about is saving for assets. That is actually something that I definitely want the committee to talk about today. We had suggested when we brought the audit to the council that we allocate the surplus that is in the general fund balance above the 25% and accounting for the budgeted deficit to our asset reserve funds. They requested that we bring that to you guys to review first. And let me stop sharing so that I can pull up that. So I can pull that information up. There we go. I will start sharing again. Let's see. All right, do you guys see this chart?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So when we brought what we originally brought to council, they again authorized the additional. We had budgeted 500,000 of an unfunded liability payment, and then they did an additional 500,000 to make it $1 million when we brought the information to council in February. Staff had suggested making additional contributions to the reserve funds based on the information provided in the biennial budget in section 7.2, I say it up here, but in section something or other. 7.2, general fund monies. We had listed out all of the things that staff anticipate needing to replace or purchase or plan for over the next 5 years. And it clearly exceeded the amount of money available in these reserve funds. So staff would like to have the surplus above and beyond the 25% required allocated to the reserve funds based on those anticipated needs. And again, council asks that we bring this back to the Financial Advisory Committee for discussion. Judy, I still would like to go over the already approved 2022-23 budget, but do you want to discuss this first, or do you want me to come back to it?
I think for my mind, it'll be easier to discuss this as we right now.
Okay.
And yeah, so let's open the discussion for that topic. And as I understand it, what council has asked us to do is talk about what to do with this allocating surplus above 25%.
Correct.
Have I got the gist of it? And to move it to an asset reserve fund with or without a financial advisor guiding the investment, or is that part of what we need to discuss?
This would just, so this, I had someone explain this to me at one point as accounting magic.
Magic.
Yeah. So when you look at the cash and investment attachment that was provided, you'll notice that we only have like 5 accounts that money is put in. Whereas when you look at our chart of accounts, we have about 80. So moving this money basically just earmarks it on our accounting schedules and in our audit to say, we plan on saving for these types of purchases. Now, moving this money does not mean that it's put aside and it can never be touched again. If something happens and we need to shuffle it around, this money can be moved at any time by a majority vote of the council. So it's not like we make this decision, put it in there, and everyone's hands are tied. This is very much a planning tool, and it allows staff. I'm not sure if anyone watched, but at the meeting on Monday, the public works staff did a great presentation on the capital improvement plan and how, staff uses, this is one of the things that staff use to plan things. For example, the General City Building Reserve Fund, ongoing maintenance. Allison had compared, the city facilities to, for example, you owning your house, that every 30 years you need to replace your roof, you need to repaint every, so many years. So if staff don't have an estimate of the money that they're going to have, we can't plan for those expenses. Staff don't generally plan to spend money we don't think we're going to have. So if we aren't contributing to these funds, we're basically not going to be planning for this maintenance that really should be happening. And that's why, we created the reserve funds, and we created the, we're hoping to start including some contributions to these in future budgets and future operating budgets, so that we can, fund these at a more sustainable pace and not do it on a one-time basis because we have money, but more thoughtful approach.
Got it. Heather, thank you. That does help. My only question in this, and then I'd like to open it up to other committee members. My question with this is this magic, this money magic that we're talking about? Thank you for that. It helps me understand. Is it something that actually can be invested and have an income, or is it something that it simply holds a place on a spreadsheet and can be useful for planning, but really doesn't have investment potential? So is there a yes or no answer to that?
There is a yes or no answer to that. So we had talked about getting an investment manager, and I have not had time to put out that RFP yet, but it is on the list of things to do. But basically that money will so right now, this, however much money we're talking about, this $1.2 million is just sitting in these accounts. So it's earning whatever we're earning in LAIF or whatever we're earning in the bank account. We do earn a small amount of money in the bank account. Once we move to an investment manager, it will just be in that lump sum of money that is put in the investments.
Thank you. That's the answer that I was looking for.
Yep.
Thank you. So I'd like to open it up for other committee members. Just going through alphabetically, Francisco Papalia, do you have any questions or you want any thoughts about this?
Yes, so two questions. If it's in an investment account, what kind of return could we expect to get? Are we limited by certain risk factors that we're not allowed to take? And so that we'll have whatever that could be, I don't know, 0 to 2%. And conversely, if we took that money and spent it to pay off unfunded pension liability, do we get, in a sense, a 7% or greater return of because we won't be paying interest or however that works? So is there a better return to paying down unfunded liabilities that we are charged at a certain rate, or instead of investing it?
So the city is restricted on what specifically we are able to invest in. There is a council approved investment policy online. It's available online, and it outlines, along with state law, what we're allowed to invest in. It's fairly conservative, but I can't answer what we would get if we, had an asset manager. That's something that we would go through, what they think that they could bring in for us when we interviewed, potential asset managers. There are both benefits and risks to simply taking the lump sum of money and putting it in CalPERS. The one, you're reducing the cash or the assets that you have available to spend. So if there was an emergency and for some reason we needed to pull money out of, these funds to use for something else, it's just not there. You can't get it back from CalPERS. If we, for some reason had $30 million and we were just going to pay down 100% of our unfunded liability, that's great for a year. The actuarial liability is recalculated once a year. So we could do that in 1 year. And then the next year, all of a sudden they're like, hey, we changed the way we calculate this and you still owe us $2 million. So there is,
I don't understand. Did anybody else understand that? I didn't understand. So you're saying that you pay it down, but there's no savings?
there isn't a guarantee. There's a savings, but there are also other factors that you need to think about. The interest rate is not the only thing the only decision that needs to go into that sort of, or the only thought that needs to go into that sort of decision.
Got it.
What would be the what would be the return? So I'm thinking that, you could take money and you can invest it and you can get a 7% return, or 2% return, or you could pay off your credit cards, which is what your unfunded liability. So instead of paying the 7.5% interest, you're paying down your credit card, which basically what that is. And so you're saving that whatever the interest that they charge on that amount. Is that not what happens? There is no, I thought they charged us interest on the unfunded liability.
They do. However, when you pay off a credit card, you then have credit available to use. If you pay CalPERS, you have that money is gone. You don't have access to that money anymore. Yes, you don't have a debt, but if something happens, you're out of luck.
I understand that, but what is the interest rate on that we save when we pay off that credit card?
I cannot answer that for you. I just said that.
Well, this year, isn't it 7 point, isn't there a number? So you mean
Yes, they charge us 7% a year on the unfunded liability.
okay. All right,
Can I ask a follow-up question onto that?
Go ahead, please.
Heather,
But before you do, Member Trainer, I thought that Member Papalia had a second question. I just want to clear his questions before if you could hold that.
No, it's just that measuring the benefit to the cost, we know that the negative is that we don't have the money if we need it. The positive, if we pay off down our liability, is that we somehow save 7%. On the other side, if we invest it, we might be able to get 1 to 2%, and we'll still have the cash available if we need it. That's what I was just saying.
Well stated. I understand your position.
So
was there a second question though? I thought you said you.
no, that's what I meant.
Okay, Member Trainer.
To the potential benefit
Got it.
of investing it, and we supposedly there's no answer to that. So
Thank you.
Judge.
Member Trainer, please go ahead. Your follow-up question.
Sure. Yeah, the whole pension thing is looming over, definitely looming over me too. And Heather, you had mentioned earlier in your presentation that the city went ahead and made the extra unfunded pension liability payment of roughly $1 million, and that brought down the required payment for next year by $100,000. Did I get that right?
That's approximate. I should have, but did not get the exact number for this meeting because I just did that. But I can get that and send that out.
So wouldn't that equate to about a 10% return next year on that $1 million? Am I thinking about that wrong?
Yeah, I mean, yes, we have, yeah. No, you're not thinking about that incorrectly.
So, I mean, so that's good. Even though 100,000 doesn't sound like a lot, that seems to me like, well, we're kind of getting a 10% benefit by the reduction of how much we have to pay. And if everything stayed exactly the same, which I know it won't, right? Because there's investment performance to factor in, and there's all sorts of other things, which I started doing the reading on the pension, on the pensions, and it's making my head swim. But if everything else stayed the same, would that mean that, so next year we save 100,000 off of what we would have had to pay in? Do we also save 100,000 in the following years based on having paid down that $1 million now?
Assuming everything stayed the same, in theory, yes.
So it is sort of a cumulative benefit to us. The more we pay down, the more we'll realize in savings as we go on, which even though it's small, that can help us a lot as we go ahead, because we know that these pension payments that are required are really going to be jumping exponentially as we, get on in the years.
Correct. The caution that I would make is that, again, we haven't been saving for asset repair and replacement. So we put all the money into pensions, and so our annual payment goes down, but I still can't replace I now don't have the cash to replace assets as they start to break. It becomes a safety hazard. It becomes, a liability if, I can't maintain the trees on the streets and, the tree limb falls. So I understand that these pensions are a huge thing, but they're one part of the puzzle. Mm-hmm. So while it seems like that is, a great, put all the money there and we have this massive savings, you start to let other pieces fall if that is the only thing that we're thinking about.
So I'm sorry, I'm jumping the line, but can I ask my other question on this asset reserve schedule?
I have a brief follow-up on the comments that you've made. The other point, Heather, and I'm going to rely on you to give me some guidance on this, but it seems to me that there is a fair amount of advocacy happening on a statewide level for pension liability reform. So in addition to the unpredictable nature of how this could play out, the rules might change going forward. Is that a fair assessment, Heather, from what your contacts in other municipalities?
I haven't heard anything about new changes. I do know that in 2013, there was the Public Employee Pension Reform Act, PEPRA. Mm-hmm. And any employee hired after 2013, a certain date in 2013, I don't know it off the top of my head. Any employee hired after that date, the pension, the incentives that public employers are allowed to offer pension-wise are severely restricted. There is a cap on how much you can, pay out. And so the liabilities that we have now are from older pensions, and it will even out eventually once you start to have more PEPRA, the Public Employee Pension Reform Act, PEPRA employees.
Got it. And that type of advocacy, although we don't have specifics, is potential going forward to really change the rules of the game.
That it's all dictated by state law.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And Kim, I hope I didn't derail your train of thought, but please continue.
No. So the one thought was about the pension, and then the other thought was the reserve fund table that's on the screen right now, the column that shows current balance. It just did sort of a quick calculation there. That's about $2.5 million in current reserve fund balance that's spread across these different categories. And we're proposing taking it up to about 3.7. So about a 50% increase in that, which is pretty healthy, increase in that balance. And the contributions vary and the proposed ending balances vary. And I was wondering if these various funds have any sort of like an asset replacement schedule or a proposed maintenance schedule that would help us to gauge, is it the appropriate level that each one of these buckets is receiving?
So not yet. We did have a physical asset inventory done, and we're working on having a more comprehensive asset replacement schedule kind of created internally. But in the meantime, when we go to section 7.2 of the biennial budget, you'll see that departments listed over the next 5 fiscal years what they anticipate needing to replace. And so, for example, the police equipment, it was almost 600,000. The fire equipment was 2.6. Some of this is, if, so like this 1.5, but, and we recently bought, we recently got a lease for this. So that is something that we have covered through debt service, but we will need to, if you look at what we're asking to fund, this is the Fire Equipment Reserve Fund. the Fire Equipment Reserve Fund currently has 407,000. Payments on that truck are only going to be, we're only going to be able to make them for, a couple of years until we run out of money. So we need to fund that. And they still need to, update their radios, which is fairly significant. Then if you keep going, EMS is we need a new gurney. And so we have gone out. IT, there's a lot going on here. We had an IT master plan done before COVID. I remember sitting in a room with people. So we had that done previously, and these were the things that they said you really need to get done. And if you think about everything going on in the world right now and everything that we really need to make sure we are up to date on our cybersecurity. So this is, something that we need to plan for. And oh, my computer is very slow. I apologize. But so this is all available on the website. And so taking all of these things into consideration and looking citywide and saying, okay, we have a finite amount of resources. What is, from an administrative level, what we really need to focus on, that's where we came up with these allocations.
Okay. Can you tell me again where that is on the website?
Of course.
Go back to that.
So if you go to albanyca.org, departments, finance and administrative services, budget and financial reports. The biennial budget is this. I also post the quarterly updates here as well. You can find the budgets from previous years. You can find the audits, but the 208-page biennial budget document is this operating budget fiscal year 2021-22 and 2022-23 link.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Great, thank you. I just want to say how much I appreciate everybody's comments. I really think this is an interesting and important discussion. And I want to check in with Mark Criven. Mark, are you still with us? And
yeah, I'm still here.
How are you feeling? And have any questions?
I'm still here. Yeah. Gosh, I guess I just feel like, in the future, there's going to be a lot more payments, whether it's pension or this, than we currently are on the path to pay. And so the question is, the best way to position the city to be able to pay them. I think, so part of it is what you were sort of getting to at the very end, how much of these are short-term versus long-term. If they're short-term, it's a no-brainer. You need to set aside money for them. But part of it is, I think if you just look at it also just financially, I think the discussion about saving the interest on the pension makes sense. But I don't know if there's a strategy or something. I'm hoping there's a strategy that's kind of like, we're going to make this this is a great city to live in, and it's going to have paved streets and lots of services for people who need them and things like that. And then eventually we're going to have to come to the public with some ideas of how to crack a very big nut. And we're just going to call that the pension nut. If that's the strategy, great. But if that's not the strategy, then it's better to pay off some of the, as much as possible, the pension nut now, and then come back to the public with, well, we have some pension stuff and we have some, unfunded capital things and whatever. I guess I'm kind of missing what the strategy is. I guess I'm inferring that the strategy is to just put it all in the pension. Is that, yeah, I don't know. Has there been, in the strategic planning or anything, is there any conversation about that, about sort of almost like politically, like how to move forward with the financial situation that's coming?
It comes up every once in a while, specifically when we start to budget and, we start to talk about long-term financial obligations, but then it's not necessarily always front and center in people's minds. So at some point, I do hope to bring a debt service policy to council. Pension is a debt, right? So that would have to be incorporated. We also need to talk about, policy wise, what are we willing to leverage? How much debt are we willing to have versus how much do we need to save for? We most likely are going to need to bond for sewer work in the near future. And at that point, we're going to have to determine, are there other things that we need to bond for, or do we just want to pay cash for everything? Like what are the interest rates for bonds versus our pension versus, and that's a huge thing with pensions is people have thought about, pension obligation bonds, which again, sounds great. You could in theory restructure your debt at a lower interest rate. But what happens the next year when your actuarial valuation says, "Oop, you owe us another $2 million." So I promise there's a method to the madness. There's just so many moving pieces that, it is very hard for staff to plan for. That's really it. It's really hard for staff to plan to to create an asset replacement schedule, to, think about how can we improve parks or do these things if we don't know that money's going to be there. The majority of what everyone has been looking at for the last 10 years in Albany is the current operating budget. And there were small reserve funds, but there was no formal policy. So, we put together a formal policy, but we don't necessarily, looking at a $1.7 million budget deficit, I haven't wanted to say, let's put all of these lines in here to fund our reserves, because we need to address that operating deficit first and then figure out, what is sustainable. At some point, it might be something that the financial advisory committee has to go to the council and say, look, we need to know what is important to, policy wise. I can tell you what's happening. I can tell you what I think. I can tell you, factual details, but I, as staff, am not setting policy for how we're going to address these things.
Of course, yeah. Well, okay, so let me just back up and just concentrate on this chart. Is this the minimum funding? Is that the minimum suggested contribution, or is that the minimum to be in that fund?
That is the minimum suggested to be in that fund based on the policy in case there's an issue. So the policy, okay. Let's go back.
So it's like a minimum balance.
Yeah, basically.
Okay, that's fine. I don't need to see the policy.
Yeah, this is the policy's minimum funding level, so that in theory, we don't want to go below it in case there's an emergency, we can draw on it. It can go below with a majority vote by council.
Okay, so I guess, my feedback is, to the extent that the suggested contributions are for things that you need to plan for the next few years, I think it's totally reasonable to set that money aside, because then you know how much money you have left, how big that nut is for, pension and other stuff, right? And so I would, to that extent, I would suggest putting in the suggested contribution. To the extent that it's for long-term stuff, I think that there's a larger conversation to be had about putting money away long-term, earning low interest when we have a more immediate sort of ballooning problem that's compounding at a pretty high rate. Does that give you the feedback? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks. I don't believe this was an action item. I think this is simply a report. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, it was.
Mhm.
I was just looking for feedback from the committee for, to bring back to council next meeting.
It does beg the question about whether we need to, as a finance advisory committee, generate a policy proposal for council and think about that as a potential future agenda item. But in the interest of time, we have other things to talk about. And barring any further comment, we should move to the public. I think we still are just us.
There are 2 attendees.
Okay.
One attendee.
Any hands up?
No hands up.
Okay.
I have a comment.
Oh, please. We can go for further comments, but I'd like to not go around again. We'll just have one last comment. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. I think our role is to give our advice to the council. That's what I heard you say. So we need to make a statement to them because that's what we're here for, because we're spending all this time on this. And I also want us to think about the idea that the council wants us to say the tough thing. Okay? They want us to say, in my opinion, we need to pay down the pension liability. Okay? And we need to, if we're going to have to tighten our buckle on expenditures, then that's what we have to do. But it's time to pay down the debt. And they don't have to heed our advice, okay? But I think they want us to give them cover in a sense, because they don't want to be the council that be on the council 3 or 4 years from now when we need another $2 million and it's not there. So what I don't understand is that you have the level of funding that's there and you want to increase the funding for this year. I don't see why we need to increase the funding if there's going to be a problem next year because we didn't put that $100,000 in. Well, we can look at that next year for each one of these items. But it seems like you have a reserve there to cover any emergency that could happen this year, and that you're projecting farther into the future more than a year away. Well, let's deal with that next year, but this year, pay down the debt. And I believe we have to say something to them. That's the role of this committee. Is we don't make policy, we advise policy, and we should be coming up with an advice to the council about how to deal with this money.
Thank you. I believe we are, with that statement, ready to move to the work plan report from the Revenue Oversight.
I would like to make a motion. I mean, that's.
But then, please.
I don't get it. I need to understand how this is working, because if this is just talking, nothing's happening. The council isn't going to hit. Why are we talking if we're not communicating to the council? If Heather doesn't bring back something, so we need to understand what the purpose of this.
I will be summarizing your comments in my staff report to council. If you would like to do something else, that's completely up to you. But just so you know, I will be summarizing this conversation for council.
Well, and with all due respect, I do want to underscore the fact that this was a report that we were to receive tonight. It was not an action item. It did not require a motion or a proposal, but if you would like to make a motion, please go ahead and we can discuss it. Go ahead.
Can you pull up the, what we're talking about? I can't hear you, but can you hear me?
Yeah, you're talking about the reserve schedule.
Yeah, the reserve schedule.
Heather, can you put the reserve schedule on screen again, please? Thank you.
So we're talking about the column, the suggested contribution. Okay. The current balances that are there in that column, I deem sufficient for the following year. And I would like to propose that we advise council to put the suggested contributions not towards those funds, but to paying down the unfunded pension liability.
I don't know that we can make that conclusion that those reserve funds are sufficient. And I'm just looking at the IT reserve fund because the other schedule that was put up on the screen showed like $1.7 million of rather urgent upgrade needs. I don't know what the timing was on that. Did they say we really need to be doing this immediately, or is that a 5-year thing, or what? You're muted.
The consultants did indicate that they wanted us to do a lot more than 1.7 million almost immediately. This was what staff thought was really, urgent and we should be doing. We do know that it's not something that we can do year one, but knowing that funding is coming, we can better allocate, what is an emergency, like what do we really need? The reserve funds are not just for emergencies. The minimum funding level is, in theory, to be able to cover emergencies if, our general asset replacement is, we miss the mark for something, or, an engine breaks or something like that. The reserves really should be for planning for, routine asset replacement for safety purposes. And these are for larger expenses that aren't part of our annual operating budget, but still have to be paid. And if we don't save for them, we will have to get debt for them at some point.
So we have a motion on the table from member Papalia, and we had a question from member Trainer. Do we have a second? Wondering if we could have a restatement of the motion at this point.
Well, I'm open to anyone's friendly amendment if you think. I've said no to all the suggested contributions. If someone wants to make a line item kind of thing, I'm open to that.
So your motion again is simply do not. Can you state your motion again for me?
I thought that we have. How much? What is the total of the suggested contributions, Heather?
1.2 million.
1.225. Okay. I suggest that we spend as much of that as possible, a minimum of 1 million toward paying down another million of the unfunded pension liability. So I'll put down 1 million, and then instead of.
So your motion is to pay down the unfunded liability by 1 million to reserve the 225,000 for additional unanticipated expenditures. And I'm waiting for a second on that motion.
I'm not sure I agree with it. I'm totally on board with trying to bring the pension liability to the attention of the council. And I think Member Papalia has the right impression that we're here to make the hard call and say things that people don't want to deal with. But I also don't feel like I'm in a position to say, well, reallocate this 1.2 million, because I get a sense of urgency on the IT thing for sure. And, you know, maybe on some of the other equipment, but without really analyzing it, I don't feel like we're in a position to say, don't set aside money for these items, and some of which could be urgent. The IT budget looks like even with the $250,000 allocation would be, you know, about 1/3 funded to what they think we should be doing pretty much immediately. And I don't feel like I'm in an expert position to, you know, overrule that and say, pay down the pension instead. But I do think that we should be talking about some sort of a memorandum or motion or some sort of comment to council about the urgency of the pension situation, and that this is something that needs to be more urgently considered when we're talking about budgeting as we go forward. And I just don't even see why we can be doing deficit budgeting when we know that we have these additional millions of dollars that are going to need to be spent every year. I think that it's more of a comment of, you know, well, this has just been presented to us. I don't feel like I'm in a position to evaluate, you know, how urgent the stuff is, although it looks like some of it's pretty urgent. But going forward, there's an opportunity to hopefully impact strategy of the council and really impress upon them the need to stop deficit spending. And actually we have to come up with more revenue, or we have to cut expenses, because these pension funding payments are going to come due pretty soon. And I think it's just easier for people to not think about what's a few years down the road, and we need to put that more squarely in front of the council.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just say I totally agree. And I just think that maybe if we're going to make a motion or something, maybe it would be to the extent that, you know, that really only things that are very high priority and to be spent in the next couple of years would be contributed out of this, and that the rest be put towards the pension. I don't feel like I know what that number is, but again, just to try to work in the pension stuff, because I agree. I have, when we talk about the taxes later in this meeting, it'll come up again, you know, but I agree on this issue as well. So
Is that an amendment, Mark, or is that just a comment? Amendment to the motion. We have a motion on the table. We still don't have a second.
Yeah.
Would you accept that as an amendment, that it be, rather than putting in a dollar figure of $1 million or whatever, that it just be only very high priority and items to be spent in the next couple of years be part of the contribution, and that the focus should be on paying down the pension deficit?
Sounds great to me, but and put it just like that. That's a very good way of putting it.
Okay.
Propose to the council that, okay, so a new proposal that the city take a very detailed look at the suggested contributions and only fund those that deemed of the absolute highest priority, and to use the remainder to pay down the unfunded pension liability. Does that sound like it's what you were trying to say, Mark?
Yeah, high priority, and also spent within the next couple of years.
Okay. I like that.
I'm not sure if Anne is listening, but my notes on this, if I may, because I'm trying to capture the actual motion and the revised motion, and we'll still need a second, but The motion, as I gather it, with a friendly amendment, is the city take a detailed look and suggest at the suggested contribution and only fund the highest priority items with projects that will be, the money will be spent within the next 24 months. The balance of that would be spent to pay down the unfunded liability,
Pension liability.
pension liability. Did I get it?
Yeah.
Okay, that's it. And now I need a second. Second by Priven. Can we have a roll call, please?
Public comment if.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Yes, a public comment on that motion. Thank you.
All right. Member Pavalia?
Do we have any public comment?
No.
No, okay, thank you.
Member Priven?
Yes.
Vice Chair Trainer?
Yes.
And Chair Kerr?
No. So the motion carries.
Oh, there. So somebody is raising their hand now.
Oh, okay. Somebody's out there. So we have voted, but we will hear public comment and vote again.
Oh. Allow to, oh. Thanks, Jeremy.
Hi. I had a question. At the last council meeting, they were giving, they were proposing the $28,000 to that Shumi, the Indian. And just curious, where would that money come from? I'm sorry, I did come kind of late on this, so I'm not sure if that was taken up or not, but I'm just curious, where would that money come from if they were going to give, they were proposing the 28,000, but I don't believe that it was finalized. And that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
You're
I
welcome.
apologize that we can't go back and forth with your question. We simply can hear it as it relates to the motion on the table, and other general questions. So any other public comment at this point?
No.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. And we need a roll call, please.
Do you want to redo the roll?
I do, because we've had public comment. Thank you.
Okay. All right, sure. Member Pavalia?
Aye.
Member Priven? Vice Chair Trainer?
Yes.
And Chair Kerr?
Still no. Thank you.
Motion passes.
Okay. So with that, we have a motion and we have a statement that we will send to the council. And we have another agenda item that we're going to move to. If I can find my agenda. I think this is where we have a report on revenue enhancement ideas. I'm not able to pull it up, but maybe Heather, if you could share the screen on the report from the subcommittee, that would be
Sure, give
helpful.
me 1 second.
Member Papaya, do you want to introduce this?
Sure. We've got this, starting with the vacancy. I just want to make sure we have the same paperwork. Yeah, okay. Chair Kerr and myself have met over the phone a couple times and discussed various options for increased revenue. And in this here now, one of the first one that we discuss on this here is vacancy tax for residential. And it's a potential revenue, depends on the estimated number of empty dwellings and rate charge. And she calculated at 10% of fair market value. Vacancy rate of 1.4%, total estimated units perhaps, empty per month, 116 units, median rent, $2,500 a month times 116. And at 10%, that would be, I guess, $348,000 potential revenue that could come. These are all estimated numbers, so we just try to come up with what kinds of potential sources could come up with some kind of revenue stream. So there's another vacancy rate of houses at 0.4%. Total estimated houses, empty per month, 33. Median rent of $3,500 times 33. 10% of that is $138,000. And vacancy defined in terms similar to the City of Oakland and Berkeley ordinances. This would be to allow for certain amount of time, which is normal, that it takes for sometimes renovating a unit between tenants. Could be a change of ownership where different kinds of major repairs need to be done. So the term in which something needs to be vacant before it would be taxed is really something that we need to study and come up with the one that would work best, and considering normal contingencies for property owners. There was a potential expense of administration fees of 5%. Argument in favor, housing, there's a housing shortage, which is aggravated by empty houses and apartments. And property tax revenues from empty properties are assumed to be very low. Sometimes these vacant units have very low tax bases because they've been owned for a very long time. And with Prop 13, the incentive for property owners to rent sometimes is reduced because of low taxes. And so we need to kind of give a nudge and incentivize those owners who are not having to deal with market forces that exist in other states that don't have Prop 13. Arguments against: smaller property owners who have 1 to 2 residential units could be against it based on their holdings not being really large enough to warrant this kind of tax or measure.
Thank you.
What
I'd like to,
yeah.
if I may, what I'd like to do is, as quickly as we can get through the entire list, is have a discussion as we go through. And my thinking on this is that we would just forward this directly to the council with any changes or revisions or further comment from the full Finance Advisory Committee. So if we can take each item one by one and just have a relatively quick discussion. So thank you for presenting that first item, Francesco. Anyone have any comments from the committee or from the public on this residential tax vacancy?
Can I just ask a general question? Part of the materials that were provided for this meeting included a memo dated today from Heather about 2022 ballot measures. And there are 3 potential revenue measures there, one of them being a commercial vacancy tax. And so did you guys work in concert with Heather on that so that this is intended to sort of go hand in hand with that memo? Or is it just a totally separate thing?
The timing of the meetings between the city council and the Finance Advisory Commission were less than fortunate for these items. We were working on these items in absence of council recommendation and didn't know that council was going to be presenting those at the same time. It's our hope going forward that all of these will be able to be reviewed by Finance Advisory Committee before they go to council. So in this instance, no, we did not coordinate, but it was a question of timing, not a question of intent. Does that help?
Yeah, I think we could coordinate this maybe after the fact, because some of these proposals are very similar to things that are addressed in that memo.
They are. And one of the recommendations that you may want to make, or we could consider, would be that we would eliminate the duplicate recommendations from our report and simply move forward with things that are not already under consideration from council. If that seems to make sense to folks.
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. Okay. Heather, would you mind moving us down to the next proposal?
Just before we move, I just say I really like a vacancy tax. Having lived on a block with a vacant house, it definitely affected the quality of life of the neighbors and stuff. And so,
yeah, some of the vacant properties are real blight on the neighborhoods. Some are not, but they're not actively housing people, and they're not moving revenue to the city, and they could be much better. There could be a much higher and better use for those.
Yeah.
So given member Trainor's just comments, I'm going to propose that we eliminate the vacancy tax commercial from our report to council, and because that is already under consideration, and move to the electronic, as if that's okay with everybody. I want to go too fast here. And then just move to the electronic billboard. And Francesco, if it's okay with you, I think we can kind of tag team this, and we don't.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. So in past years, this electronic billboard idea has been tossed around and met with some disapproval by some members of the public and by the residents of Albany, particularly people who live on the west side of Albany Hill were opposed to it. But electronic billboards, when they were first proposed, were kind of an oddity. And now I think we're all used to seeing electronic billboards along the freeway, and they do bring in a fair amount of revenue. The estimated revenue at one point from a member of city council who I had a conversation with about this was somewhere between $100,000 and $500,000 per year. And that money is generated by the people who rent the billboard and pay it to the city for the privilege of running their ads on the billboard that they then put up and maintain. So the city does own some high visibility property. The Public Works Department, I believe, is housed on the intersection of between 580 and 80. So there's a lot of eyeballs there. One would hope that those eyeballs were on the road, but apparently some of them would be on a billboard. And it is a potential source of revenue. So we added it here because we don't think it's worth walking away from. We think it's still something that might want to be considered by the city and by the council, and we would like the council to continue to look at that. Any comment or thoughts about that?
I'll say also I like this idea, and also, you know, if it's electronic, it's easy to change. You could make public service announcements on it. You could advertise things in Albany. You could do a lot of different things with it in addition to using it for commercial purposes. So I think it's got a lot of potential.
Yeah, I like that idea too. It just seems like a no-brainer because it's money that's not going to require city staff to spend time to generate this revenue.
Okay. Heather, would you mind moving us ahead to the next item? on the list. Thank you for controlling this. I'm going to turn this over to Francesco because this was one of his ideas, and I'm hoping he can explain it very adequately and explain what we're going on with here. Maybe he's not here right now. Francesco, are you here?
Sorry.
He's muted.
No, I just was muted.
Okay.
So I
Okay.
can make noise, like
Okay.
not disturb you.
Sports betting initiative, which is on the ballot for November 8th, which I want you all to know is my birthday this year. So
Oh, I know.
it has been in past years as well. But if you could present this, that would be great. Thanks.
Okay. The Legalized Sports Betting on American Indian Lands Initiative has qualified to appear on the ballot November 8th, 2022. We won't know exactly until June whether it's going to be on the ballot and whether there could be competing initiatives. What was significant about this one is that it would allow sports betting throughout the state of California, and most particularly, it would allow sports betting to happen at Golden Gate Fields and other racetracks in the state of California. This could dramatically transform how Golden Gate Fields is used from now and for a long time. The ballot initiative would tax gross gaming revenues from sports wagering at 25%. Supposedly, the money is to go towards a fund that would be, through legislation, used to address homelessness, affordable housing, public education, and mental health. In addition to the 25% tax, 1% of the tax would be levied to fund problem gaming treatment. The ballot initiative would enact a 10% tax on profits derived from sports betting at racetracks. Now, where that money would go, how much we would receive is not known. But I think it's important that the city gets ahead of this because if it's going to be on the ballot, if we'll know in June, and then it'll be a very short time until November till the vote would happen. Unfortunately, some of the portion of these revenues might not make it to these, really increase the money spent towards homelessness and the other mental health issues, but could end up, like with the lottery, state lottery, just mean that the sources, this would be a new source for these projects, and that the general fund that would be used for these same projects would be diverted elsewhere. So there's a question whether how well these new funds would reach the sources that are they purport to be for. There is, Heather, could you bring up the map that is part of the addendum that I brought in there? The reason why I want to show the map is that it shows how this sport, a lot of you might not know about sports betting, but throughout the country, it has been, since a 2018 federal law that was struck down that limited gambling to Nevada. These states in gray, in green, have allowed now sports betting. It is a potentially, I don't know, 100 million to a trillion industry over time. California is in one article was labeled the holy grail of sports betting. we know that our economy is such a, was it like a sixth of the economy of the entire country? Well, the people who do sports betting, then the two big names I want you to remember, so that you'll probably start hearing about them or seeing them. It's called DraftKings and FanDuel. These are the national organizations that want to get in on this, and they will be produce competing ballot measures with the local Indian gaming community. There was a poll that was recently taken that by the University of California found that 45% of the voters support the idea, 33% are opposed, and 22% remain undecided. I think that there's a very good chance that this will happen in some form or another in the state of California, and we just need to be prepared of how things might happen if the initiative that would allow sports betting at Golden Gate Fields passes in November, if it's all right. So this could, and how can we get our share of those revenues is important to know. And I don't know if this is the time to talk about it, but one of the things that we're studying is the business tax. That's about gross receipts. And this business tax, when we discuss it, could be applicable to Golden Gate Fields sports betting. Okay.
Little bit of jumping ahead on the agenda, but thank you. It is pertinent. So thank you for that presentation. Any discussion on this from other committee members, or should we just continue to roll?
I just have a question. Does the city have a lobbyist?
Does the city? Oh.
Not to my knowledge. I'll defer to Heather or Ann if there's any further information on that. But
we have a public information officer. They don't generally lobby. We're part of the League of California Cities. They have lobbyists. They often send out emails asking municipalities to write letters for or against things, but we don't particularly have a specific lobbyist. No.
So, I guess I don't know. I don't really know how I'm more familiar with how legislation works and not so much ballots, so I don't know how to influence a ballot. But it seems like whether it's through an organization that we are part of, like the Bay Area Governments, Association of Bay Area Governments, maybe, or
the League of Cities,
or whatever it is, it might be helpful to figure out if we have some kind of insight or some political influence on how this gets written or which ballot goes forward, because it seems like it could be very important.
Is there going to be a competing ballot initiative from the Indian gaming community, or do they already have the ability to do this? I don't know what's happening currently.
So I've done this stuff online and found the information that the main competitors are being backed by DraftKings and FanDuel. There's certain components that want to create a need for anybody who does this to have, get this, $100 million buy-in fund. So we're talking big money people who want to get involved in this. And so there's a good possibility that there will be a competing initiative, at least one and maybe two, and we won't know about it until June, because that's the deadline, my understanding, for initiatives to be placed on the ballot. They have to have the signatures and whatever it takes to make it happen with the Secretary of State to go forward. if you, in the, yeah, okay, I'll leave it at that.
Just my following of ballot tracking, I don't see, again, like Francesca, I'm just following this online, but I have not seen any competing measures. I think this may be a standalone measure on the November ballot this year. So I haven't seen anything that's kind of making its way through the process of gathering signatures or anything else that would be competing. So I don't know how that changes the fact that we would need to advocate for this through whatever process we had, but it is going to be on the ballot. And whether the city can endorse this through the League of Cities or Association of Bay Area Governments, or how those entities will ultimately decide, but we can still move it forward to the council and say that we think it is worthy of our consideration. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. The next agenda item, the next topic on our report is really just a reiteration of a concern that the city of Albany has had, or that we in the city of Albany deal with in many levels. And that is that much of our property in Albany is controlled by the University of California. Included in that University of California property is Belmont, the Belmont Village site and the Sprouts Commercial Plaza, in addition to UC Village. Those are all university-owned lands. And as such, property tax revenues are absent. The university is a nonprofit entity and does not pay property taxes. There are a lot of questions that come up from that fact, and Francesco has raised a lot of very good points, and I think may be able to speak better to them than I will be able to. Recently, as in July of 2021, the city of Berkeley tried to approach this issue of non-revenue from UC-owned lands by negotiating an agreement with the university that they would reimburse the city for $4.1 million per year for police support and fire services on its properties. That's certainly a prime way that we could consider this. I think Francesco would hope that there would be a way to dig into the issue of commercial property taxes. And if you'd like to talk briefly about that, I'd be happy for you to add to the conversation.
So I have been trying to, if almost every property that's privately owned has a tax bill that is publicly available at Alameda County, so that you can look up the address and find out what their property taxes are and what their assessed value is. And there's a number there that says how much they have to pay each year and how it changes from year to year. I have attempted to find out what is happening on these two sites, the housing, the senior housing development and the Sprouts commercial development. And although they apparently have an assessed value in the $20 to $30 million, there's no taxes on the secured property tax roll. So the land is still currently owned by the university. The buildings on top of them have a long-term, 30 to 50-year lease that's renewable, I think, and allows them to operate on state-owned land. At one time, I tried to I called the tax assessor's office. I got through. They said that the improvements on the land are on the unsecured property tax rolls. Unlike my house and businesses, commercial properties that are privately owned, there's a tax bill, and it's called the secured property tax roll. unsecured property tax rolls are not public information. And I seem to be unable to find out what that is. And so we have no idea how much those two properties are contributing to our city and how current tax measures affect them. And so I think it behooves us to try to figure out a way to find out what that is. Quite specifically, in one of the attachments, the Sprouts development is for sale for $24 million. There's a 3 or 4 page addendum to our agenda here that shows how it's described. So this property could be transferred to a new owner. I'd like to verify whether if it's going to be transferred to a new owner, will there be a property tax transfer tax that would be levied, which could, if it's sold at the 1.5% of $24 million is something like $330,000 in one transaction transfer tax. So this is just a question. There's too many questions. It's hard to get the answers to this because there seems to be a level of non-transparency with this situation. And I wish we could find out what's actually happening about this. Okay.
Thank you. I'd like to just open it up to the other two committee members if they have any questions or comments about this.
Francisco, did you say in a prior meeting that once the university puts up a commercial building on one of their properties, then there is property tax that is collected on that building? And so we know for a fact that there must be some property tax being collected, but we don't know how much it is.
Okay. You are remembering correctly.
Okay.
I have received from another source after our agenda was published, a communication that included a university, memorandum of tax liability that was instituted in 2012, around the time this project happened, and was confirmed in September of 2021, coincidentally with this property going on the market, that makes some kind of statement, and I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a tax person, that the university is an entity unto itself, and whether it's commercial or educational, that according to the state constitution, they're exempt. I don't know what that means. I can forward it to us all and be part of this investigation. I'm not a lawyer. It doesn't specifically reference in detail this property. So until we get a statement from our city attorney or some other entity about this situation, like the county assessor, it's not very transparent. What can be taxed, and then on top of that, what will be taxed.
Mm-hmm. Maybe this is a question for Heather. When we receive in your current report, we've got about $5 million in receipts for the first 3 quarters of the fiscal year in property taxes. When we get that, does any sort of a detail come along with that? Like, this is what all these different properties paid in taxes?
So it does break it out between secured and unsecured property. It does not break out who pays what oftentimes, I don't know exactly, since the county does do all of the assessing, oftentimes the value of a lease is considered proprietary and would not be public information. And that is what's being taxed on your unsecured roll, is the value of the lease. And so the lease, the amount that we are getting on the unsecured roll is a tax on, like, for example, Sprouts. Sprouts would be taxed on the value of the lease. Habit Burger would be taxed on the value of the lease. It is not a tax on UC Berkeley. The secured or real property is owned by UC Berkeley, and so it is not taxable. So we don't get partial taxes on it or anything like that. It is simply, we are getting our share of the county's, we're getting the 1% or whatever of the unsecured lease amount.
How much unsecured property is there in the city?
I just recently got information from the assessor, and there's maybe 5 or 6 possessory interests that are reported. The exempt properties, so for example, the city has to file one of these, and UC Berkeley would have to file what's called a possessory interest form with the county each year, indicating what the address is that we lease out and how much that lease is for. And the assessor uses that to charge the possessory interests.
I'm just wondering if there's not really that many, if we could back into it, or, you know, come up with an educated guess of what we think we might be getting from these properties.
Before I provide, I have to see if there is any confidentiality in this. So for example, with sales taxes, generally what you can do is provide, you know, specific, you know, this type of retailer or this type of retailer or this type of retailer. But if it becomes very clear, like if I said, oh, here's what Albany's department stores bring in, I've now put myself in jeopardy because we only have one department store. The tax confidentiality in tax laws is real intense. So before I gave out any information, I would want to confirm exactly what confidentiality, if any, there is around the possessory interests, and then go from there.
Thank you. Thank you. Heather, you were going in and out a little bit there. I was losing you just a tad. So hopefully that'll stop. And if it doesn't, we may ask you to check out and check in again.
Okay.
So we can, were other people having that same difficulty, or was it?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. 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 Was there any other further discussion on this?
I got a notification my connection was.
It's freezing right now.
Are you still with us?
I have no idea. Can you hear me?
We can, but maybe we should take a 5-minute break. And Heather, if you can you hear me, Heather? Why don't we take a 5-minute break? Come back at 8:48. And Heather, if you could just log in again, and we'll continue the report.
Okay,
We still have another minute. We said we come back at 8:48, so just in case anybody else in the public or anyone who's waiting for us, we'll give it another few minutes. But the break was most welcome on my behalf, so thank you all for that.
Yes.
And I think we're ready. Heather, if you can move this down to page 4, we're making rapid progress.
Can
here.
Can I just make a comment on the last item?
Absolutely, yes. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to move ahead too fast.
That's okay. Well, first of all, I really like this item, and I just want to thank you all for bringing it forward. I think it's an important thing. And part of what I'm hearing maybe is that you've taken it to a certain part, but now, you know, maybe you need an attorney or some expert in this field. So I don't know if I'm hearing that correctly, but I would encourage the city to engage or talk to some experts in this if it seems warranted. There are universities all over the state that have Starbucks and all kinds of businesses on them. So this can't be, you know, a unicorn issue, and there must be experts on this. So I would just encourage you all to get some expert help if you feel like you could benefit from that.
I would encourage the council I would encourage all of us to encourage the council to do the same. So.
Yes, I would encourage the council to think about that.
Mm-hmm.
Question, Heather? Heather, you there?
I am.
Okay, I'm looking at a tax bill here on a property, and I heard you say that the countywide tax in Albany, there's the countywide tax is 1%, and the city, we have all these others that add up to 0.378%. So do you think that this properties that have an assessed value of $26 million is paying any part of that tax? Because I thought I heard
No.
you say they don't pay that?
No. So what you're looking at is, and this might be a different conversation, but the 1%, the city gets a portion of that. Mm-hmm. That is what is assessed on the possessory interest or the unsecured property. The city taxes that you're looking at on the left side of your tax bill are for the pension override tax and the bond, any bonds that we have that are assessed on your property value. And again, since the UC is not taxable, we don't assess that on their property value, and it's not assessed on, well, it might be assessed on unsecured. I have to take that back. I will double check on that for you.
Right. So there's the ad valorem tax, which is the 1% countywide plus 0.3781% of all of our school taxes, City of Albany, County Go Bond, Bay Area Rapid Transit, East Bay Regional Park District. Those are all ad valorem taxes. Then on the other side of the bill are all the city landscape, mosquito, sidewalk tax, vector control, East Bay Regional Park District, library service. These are parcel taxes. So what I'm trying to find out is do either of these properties pay anything towards this bond, the ad valorem tax in any way, either the university or the people who own the buildings on top of them, which have assessed values, and are the parcel taxes, those, $75.54 for the city landscape tax. Are those being allocated? And this also comes into effect in these other taxes that's the new EMS tax that we want to put in here.
So parcel taxes are not assessed on unsecured. They are only assessed on secured property. I do have to double check on the ad valorem. I don't think that they are assessed on unsecured, but I will double check on that.
Okay. Good.
Okay, are we ready to move on to marijuana?
Public comment? Anybody?
Public comment, anybody? No public comment.
Okay.
Anybody coming in late on that? No. Actually, Francisco, I kind of wanted to hold public comment toward the end rather than have public
Okay.
comment at each individual one. So local tax on marijuana dispensary, warehouse, and production. The history of marijuana dispensary, warehouse, and production services in the city of Albany is that the existing prohibition, and there is an existing prohibition, went into effect, and this is based on my interview with Nick Pilch. The city did not support the default option, so therefore was assigned by the state as not participating in any of the marijuana initiative or any marijuana business whatsoever. It is still a huge revenue, and a little bit of the scariness of marijuana businesses may have or may not have actually changed over the years. But currently, the state of California is collecting beaucoup bucks, nearly $1 billion in adult use marijuana tax. And the city of Albany is not part of any of that because we do not have any of those services. Francisco did a really nice job reaching out to Angela Hill, who's the Deputy Director of Cannabis Control in California. And we are continuing conversations with this individual in hope that they will be able to provide us with possibly an estimate of what we could anticipate if we had a dispensary, if we had a warehouse, if we had production. Obviously, there's a lot of flux in these numbers, and we really don't know because we don't know what we might be able to attract. But we do have some potential industrial space down on Pierce Street where we could, there could be a grow down there. There could be a warehouse down there. It's kind of conveniently located. We could use the billboard to advertise that we had it. And so I would like us not to forget that this is a potential source of revenue. It's not a hard recommendation. I don't have any absolute, we got to do this, but it's still out there as a potential source of enhanced revenue for the city of Albany. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions or comments that other folks might have.
Just one thing is that I think we're going to find out whether if we just open ourselves up to or allow things to happen, then we might be able to share. So we don't actually have to necessarily have a dispensary in town, but we will invite any potential dispensary to come and make a proposal, and we have to come up with a plan that they could accommodate that kind of thing.
And my understanding is that it's not just dispensary, but it's the other aspects of the marijuana business. Yeah. Okay.
Good.
Is it currently illegal for the city to have this type of operation or not?
I don't think it's illegal, but we're not participating because we were assigned by default as not opting in. So we could make a recommendation to the council that they simply opt in. I'm not sure what would be required. That would be an attorney that would have to guide us through that process, but we would change our designation. We would apply, I would assume, and then potentially, even without an actual business, we might generate some revenue. I think those are questions still that we need to answer, and we don't have those answers yet.
Sounds good.
No other comments? Nothing else? Okay. We're moving down the next block. The next item is really a reiteration of the issue that we talked about a couple moments ago, where the UC Berkeley is not actually participating in some of the services, including public works, including fire and police support. They do provide their own policing services in the University Village, but obviously the support comes from our police department, and fire comes from Albany, and the sewer lines and the utilities come through services that are provided in the city. So somehow or other, this is something that I think we need to think about and talk about. And, it's great to be a good neighbor, and it's great to have the university. And I I sent my daughter to UC, and I totally support them, but the city of Berkeley has recognized that they need to pay their fair share, and I think the city of Albany would stand in good stead to follow that example. So that's why I put it in again, because I want to say it again. So moving down.
I agree.
You want to take this one, Francisco?
Yes, progressive real estate transfer tax. Up until a few years ago, we had, when a real estate property sold, the city charged a 1.15% transfer tax. We recently passed a tax measure that increased that to 1.5%. It's typically split 50-50 between the buyer and the seller, but all the money goes to the city. This increase from 1.15 to 1.5%, I believe, was instrumental in the increase in property transfer tax revenue that kept us afloat or in the black through the last 2 years. So we're looking into a progressive real estate tax that would, what I thought of is that be a little more equitable as progressive taxes are. Basically, we've had a flat tax. So someone who purchased a $400,000 to $600,000 condominium on Pierce Street pays 1.5%, and someone who buys a $1.5 million to $2 million single-family home pays 1.5%. Someone who sells a $7 million apartment building that happened a couple years ago on Solano Avenue pays 1.5% transfer tax. So we have an idea that we could have a progressive transfer tax that I thought could even lower the 1.5% down to 1% for properties under 900,000. That would be only for the small condominiums. You can't find a house under 900,000, okay? And then from 900,000 to 1.5 million, it would be 1.5%. And from 1.5 million up to 2.5, it would be, what do we have? I'm sorry, I got confused here. Over 1.5 million, it could be 2.5% for properties over 2.5 million. I'm not sure if we rewrote this down properly. And 1.5.
I think that may be my clerical
Yeah.
error. I apologize.
So-
but it's a proposal.
Yeah, it's just an idea to have, like for instance, this $24 million property is, if it's sold at Sprouts, would be paying the same percentage as a transfer tax as a $500,000 condo. So we're trying to figure out a way, and of course, any kind of progressive real estate transfer tax would have to be analyzed, because the purpose of it would be to get more money from the 1.5 to 2.5 to $10 million sales, and that would outweigh any loss that would occur to the reduction in transfer tax for the properties under 900,000. So we'd pick the numbers in a way that would, an analysis of the progressive rates would be such that we would know that we would get more money with this progressive system than we presently do.
Thank you. Thank you. Comments?
Sorry, I'm starting to lose my voice. So I mean, the idea sounds fine to me. You said that you're looking for this overall to be a little bit more than revenue neutral. I'm not sure if part of the goal really is to raise more money, or if it's really the goal is mostly to be progressive. Both.
That the numbers, however it be done, there's a way of analyzing it. I mean, that would be that whatever the over 1.5% would greatly outweigh any reduction for the.
I think we'd need to find the median sale price and
Right.
then build it from there.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So
You
then-
might have to drop the lower end
Yeah.
lower or something like
Yeah.
that.
I just came up with some numbers.
Sure.
Right. That I'm not tied to the numbers. I'm just trying to figure out the goal. But the goal is to overall increase.
Yes,
Revenue,
Okay.
we are the revenue enhancement people.
that's
Yeah,
right.
okay. So the only comment I'll make is like, I think rather than saying the price between, if it's in between 900 and 1.5, it gets taxed at X rate. I think it's the first 900,000 gets this much. The next 600,000 gets taxed at this percent. And then anything above that gets taxed, because otherwise the difference between a $2.49 million sale and a $2.51 million sale could be very substantial, right? So if you just tax the bands, you kind of get rid of that, otherwise you're going to have a bunch of, $899,000 sales and a bunch of $2.49 million sales or whatever,
Mhm.
Yeah,
Right. So just the way the income tax tables work, right?
Exactly.
Good point. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Is this something that other cities do?
That's a good question. I don't
yes,
have an answer.
Berkeley has instituted a kind of a luxury tax on the higher end. I don't think that they did the lower end thing.
Mhm.
We are. So I think they did. I think there's throughout the state, in general, the highest one has been 1.5%. We just came up to the state average high end of 1.5%. Okay. There are some entities that are now creating a second tier above that, just having like a 2-tier. I was trying to do a multi-tier.
Mhm.
Okay. With no further comment. Go to move to what I believe is the last item. I don't think there's anything below this. Neighborhood parking permits. I'll go ahead and present this because this was actually an idea that I threw at member Papalia, and he said, "Okay, let's see how that flies." What we have in the city of Albany is an increasing density situation where the free parking that we've had on our streets is not going to be an option anymore. A number of the buildings and the codes have been revised so that buildings are not required to put in parking. So our streets are going to become increasingly crowded and increasingly difficult to park on. And the city of Berkeley has had residential neighborhood parking permits. City of El Cerrito has residential parking permits based on an individual neighborhood's interest in having them. So there's a sort of a democratic process that's happening in El Cerrito, and the neighborhoods near the BART stations are interested, but maybe the other ones aren't so much. In any event, the proposal is for initiating a first vehicle rate of $50 a year and a second vehicle of $200 a year for stickered parking. The administrative cost for this, obviously, we would probably have to employ another parking monitor, a guy to drive around, person to drive around in a truck and ticket people. So there is a significant administrative and staff support cost to this. It does have a certain appeal, I think, to active transportation and environmental groups, because it really does make everybody sit up and pay attention to the fact that nothing is free, including the parking in front of your house. There will be obviously opposition for residents who have been parking for free and don't want to have anything changed to that situation. But But it's an idea. It would be revenue. I really don't have a projection on what kind of revenue it would bring in because I'm not sure how to measure the administrative cost. But if it's something that the council is interested in moving forward, I'm sure that those determinations could be made with allocation of staff time to study it and figure it out. So that's the proposal. And any comments or questions?
Does that go hand in hand with like a 2-hour parking restriction or something like that if you don't have the permit the way they do in El Cerrito and Berkeley?
It certainly could be. It's that level of detail is not here yet, but it could be, and that's a very good point. Yeah.
Because I would think if it went in combination with something like that, that would make it more attractive to homeowners because it's really hard to park in front of your own home in certain areas of Albany now.
I can't.
It's hard for me too.
So yeah, those are good ideas and good thoughts. And if this does move forward with council's request, then those are ideas that we could add to further public comment and discussion on that. So thanks for that. Other thoughts?
Makes sense. Thank you for bringing this forward. I would think part of the revenue would be tickets too, right? I mean,
yeah.
Not just the $50 or $100.
Right, exactly. All right, with that, we have not gone to the public, and I would welcome any public comment on the whole report in total or in any individual questions or concerns or thoughts that people have on the aspects of the report.
We do have public comment. 3 minutes? Is that all right? 3 minutes?
Yes, it is fine.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Hi, good evening, everybody. This is Jeremiah.
Hi, Jeremiah.
Apologize. Hi, thanks. I just want to apologize. I'm late in attending the meeting. I'm usually really good at logging on at 7. I'm just at work. Things came up. So, I think this is a great idea with the parking. So it's a great general concept. It's a great idea. And I hope it does happen sooner the better. Generate a lot of revenue to the city. But, there's a lot of details to work out, right? Like maybe an electric car might be cheaper. Maybe senior citizen discount or ADA discount. Certain things like that, motorcycle, but those are the details, right? Those can all get worked out, but the main concept is great. So the solution is we're going to need more enforcement. The problem is right now we only have 2 parking vehicles, and it's just enough for them to maintain San Pablo and Solano to give, to do their route. But to drive down every single city street all day to check, we would just need more enforcement. So maybe the money generated can actually pay for that job. So we might break even in the beginning, but then after that, in long term, it'll be great. So yeah, go for that. That's wonderful. So please recommend that to City Council. I can't see my time.
You're close. I'm estimating it, Jeremiah. Go ahead.
Okay, I just need like maybe 35, 45 more seconds. Okay, so regarding the cannabis issue, this was agendized, I think, sometime in the past with City Council, and I think Preston was for it and all this stuff. I really was actually against having a cannabis club in the city limits of Albany. I know it's been tried in the past by a family friend. And, it's just, I just don't think Albany is the right place. We're all about schools and we want to bring drugs into the town and sell weed. No, it's not a look good thing. We have the best school district in the Bay Area, but maybe we can get the money somehow from the state. Somehow we can get that revenue from the state or from other cities. But I just don't think it's a good idea to start selling weed on Solano. I'm sorry.
Yay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I did run a timer and we're We appreciate your comments, Jeremiah. Thank you very much. Okay, with that,
One quick comment or one quick question.
yes,
Would the two members of our committee who are not on the revenue subcommittee, if you have any ideas about revenue that is not on the agenda here, this is the time for you, I think, that you're able to say, hey, I had this idea, because you can't tell us, you can't relay it to us outside of the meeting. So I think it's okay to have new ideas that aren't here. Is that correct?
it is as far as I'm aware, yes.
Well, I really like that you did this, and I don't have any original ideas. I did want to ask if we wanted to also talk about the other two potential ballot measures for revenue that are going to be up in 2022. One of them being the advanced life support and EMS parcel tax.
Those are still on our agenda.
Okay, those are on the agenda
on this item, so we have not forgotten those.
Okay.
So yeah, thank you for the reminder, though. Thanks.
I don't have any ideas of my own, but I very much appreciate you all thinking of these and working them through. I'm really appreciative and impressed.
So with that, I will make one small change to this, which is to remove the item which is already under consideration by council and will be reported by Heather in another minute or two when I stop talking. And I'll finalize this as with a memo to council from Finance Advisory Committee. I don't believe I need a motion for that, but it just, because it might not be a bad idea to have one. Could I have a motion and or I will move that we revise this to not include items currently under consideration and forward it with a memo to council as recommendations from FAC. Do I have a second?
I second it.
And a roll call, please. Heather?
She dropped. Oh, no, she didn't drop. She's still there.
I'm here. I was not ready for this. Okay. And so committee member Papalia,
Yes.
committee member Priven,
Yes.
Vice Chair Trainer, and Chair Carr.
Yes. So the
Okay.
motion carries. We'll prepare a memo to council with a somewhat revised, as discussed, chart of recommendations and get that to you, Heather, to forward to council for their agenda.
And can you just confirm who seconded that?
Member Papalia.
Okay, thank you. I apologize for the hissing cats in the background.
Oh, that sounds scary.
They're
are you-
terrifying.
I bet. Are you prepared to talk us through the reports that you have as attachments on the agenda?
Sure.
Okay, great.
So I have a lot of detail on the business license proposal and on the EMS ALS tax. I do not have as much on the commercial vacancy tax. That is being spearheaded by the city attorney in the city manager's office. It is more of an economic development tool than a revenue generator. So that's not something that I've really been involved in that much. I do know that the city attorney is, per council instruction, looking also at a residential vacancy tax to bring some information forward. I'm not sure if it's going at their next meeting or the meeting after. I will let everyone know when that does come forth. So I will go into the business license tax first. The business license taxes have not really been touched for a very, very long time. I think my favorite is the fee for the public dance. And the circus. I think we should have a lot more of those, first of all. But so what we're really looking to do is modernize the tax, make it a little bit more, administrable. It's a lot of work currently for both staff and the public. People have a lot of questions when they look at the current tax rates. They log in, they pull up the information online, and they are just unsure how to calculate how much they owe. So it's currently, our business license taxes are based on how many employees you have. It's what your full-time equivalent, or FTE, is. So if you have you have two part-time employees, they're counted as one full-time employee for how we tax you. The idea is to move to a tax on gross receipts. This would, encourage hiring, because right now we basically disincentivize people to have multiple employees. So moving to a gross receipts would take that away from the from based on employee and more towards how much not necessarily revenue, but how much money you bring in. I try to be very clear on the terminology used. I tried to specifically use gross receipts in every time that I talk about this, because I want to be able to tie it back to the tax returns, so that it is very clear. Currently, it's hard to audit for this information. I mean, in order to confirm that someone's paying the correct amount on their business license, we need to pull, their 941s, which is their employment tax returns that they send to the federal and state governments. And we have to, compare all of the time records and everything. Whereas if we were going to audit for a gross receipts tax, all we'd have to do is ask for a tax return. And if they have multiple locations, most places track their gross receipts by location. If they aren't, they're probably hiding something, and we probably should do a bigger audit, but that's beside the point. So switching to this would be a lot easier to administer for staff. And additionally, as I put in my report that you guys have, my cat's claw is stuck in some styrofoam, so that's great. This is perfect. As I say in the staff report, for smaller businesses, their taxes would go down drastically. Using the sales tax information, and again, we talked about this a little bit earlier, we have to be careful with how granular we get with sales tax information because of the confidentiality laws. But using sales tax information, we were able to determine, the average restaurant makes approximately, $55,000 a year, or in gross receipts. And so the three tax structures that were proposed to council and are in the memo that you see, they have, in all of those instances, the business license tax for a small, like the average Albany restaurant, would go down. But, we'd be capturing a lot of places that, bring in a lot of gross receipts, but are reporting very few employees. In the report, I used the example of the medical offices. Our consultant was able to say that the average medical office in the area makes $500,000 a year. They're reporting, when I averaged it out, less than one employee. So clearly, we're missing something somewhere. So council directed staff to bring back more detail on the last proposal, which was to increase, to use a graduated tax similar to income tax, and to attempt to increase the amount of revenue brought in. We average just under $800,000 in revenue from the business license taxes currently, and the proposal is to increase that to $1 million. Now, in the report, I am very clear. This is a rough estimate. there is no gross receipts database anywhere that we have access to. There were a number of assumptions that we made using the consultant who has a lot of, they have a lot of experience in the area and they have a lot of resources, but there were still a lot of assumptions that were made. So when we get a couple of years under our belt of this, we might want to reevaluate what it looks like. But this was the best estimate that we could come up with. So that's the business license tax. Judy, do you want me to explain the EMS and ALS, or do you want to do questions for this first? Oh, you're on mute.
I think it'll be easier if we do them one at a time.
Okay.
And I'm fine with this. I would support what council has already moved ahead on, and I agree that the graduated tax rate seems more an approach that I would like to see us take. So, and I don't know why we decided to cap it at $1 million, but I understand that we're just talking about very rough estimates. So who knows what those numbers really mean. So those are my comments. Anybody else? Yeah, go ahead.
It also seems to me like a good idea. And most of the neighboring cities are on a model like this already. So, there's certainly a lot of precedent in the area for doing this.
Okay. Francesco, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I have on my notes having a tier, first a tier at 10 million, and I even put in 100 million because I thought that's what Golden Gate Fields would bring in. But I need to know what a gross receipt is, because I'm trying to figure out how a restaurant can only make $55,000 in gross receipts and stay in business. So what is the definition of a gross receipt?
So again, that's an average. So we have a number of smaller restaurants and then we have some larger restaurants. And this was done using sales tax data. I only had taxable data. So we estimated exempt sales. So we assumed that the average restaurant had 20% exempt sales. So we took the taxable sales number that we had, we added another 20% to that and came up with an average gross receipt. But gross receipt is every dollar in. No deduction for expenses, no anything. It is every dollar in.
Just revenues, not
Correct.
offset by expense.
Correct.
And there are some restaurants that have less than $55,000 gross receipts in this town.
Yes.
Wow.
I don't see how they can stay in business. You couldn't pay one person.
I'm trying to figure out which restaurant that
Business
is.
operators often don't pay themselves.
Okay. All right. So yeah, and so what has been, where did they come up with the $1 million in gross receipts as the highest tier? Is that comparable with other cities? And can we take a generic grocery store in the city of Albany? Do you have any idea what a generic full service grocery store would generate in gross receipts? And
I do not have the detailed data in front of me. There were a number of different levels that we looked at for where to stop, and 1 million just seemed to be the higher end of the sales tax data. Again, we could only work with the data that we had, so it might be something that we want to reevaluate in a few years, but it seemed like 1 million was, getting to be the higher end for the information that we had.
Belmont Village charges around anywhere from $5,000 to $7,000 a month per person, and they have 172 units. So that's like.
Would that be subject to sales tax?
So that's not a gross receipt. So they don't pay
So that in theory would be a gross receipt. That is not a sales taxable event.
So they wouldn't be charged in this. So this is only for sales tax events?
No, they they would be charged the business license on their gross receipts, but I don't have the sales data for Belmont Village specifically because they don't file sales taxes on that information.
But they could, that's what I was trying to say. I'm just making up, you're trying to spitball numbers. So if it's five, to make it easy, 5,000 a month times 12, that's $60,000 a year times 100 units is $6 million. So I would, 60 million, what am I saying here? I think we're talking $100 million in revenue at least. So that's why I'm trying to get a different tier, that there could be these tiers that are in the $100 million on a few select places like Golden Gate Fields and Belmont Village and maybe even
Target.
Yeah.
Or car sales, which would also have gross receipts of over $1 million, it would seem to me fairly easily on a year.
So that's all. Just that's my input is to have a $10 million tier and a $100 million tier, and because I think we have a few.
Would you increase the tax on that, or would you have a lower tax at the higher brackets?
No, I graduated tax. I mean, I'm just, yeah, so I wrote down 0.2% at 10 million, and I wrote down 0.25% at 100 million. And maybe I had Belmont Village in mind because I'm considering that they aren't paying somehow they're not paying their fair share in property taxes, or the business operation is somehow exempt, and the university is getting the money because they're not having to chart however it works. And then Golden Gate Fields, which could be generating easily $100 million for sports betting and gross receipts, easily, in my guesstimation.
I have a few comments.
Please go ahead.
So one is, I'm sorry, I'm fading. One is, I like gross receipts rather than FTE to the extent, I mean, it seems more fair and if it's auditable, but I guess I wonder how auditable it really is. I mean, I guess I'm unclear if we really get gross receipts information, and if there's multiple stores in different locations, do we really get how much receipts there is in the Albany store or whatever? So is it auditable, or is it more
So
more
I
easily
can't
contained than FTE or not?
I can't tell you necessarily for Albany businesses. However, I was a sales and use tax auditor for the state of Maine in a prior life.
Right.
And it should be easy unless they are hiding something.
Okay. So that's good. That's what I need to know. The second thing is, I'm actually not a huge fan of making this very progressive. I just feel like, when it comes to personal income, there's obviously, more income, more wealth, right? But for a company, more revenue does not necessarily mean more profitable as a percentage of revenue. I think some of our larger operators, like I'm guessing Safeway and Target, operate in very, very competitive environments, and 1% or whatever would be I don't know, but I think it would be substantial to them, even though we think of them as so big and it wouldn't matter. So I like having a very, very low tax. I mean, any business that's employing people and making less than 50,000 or 55,000 a year, I don't want to tax them. I don't want to put them out of business. And I'm okay with some progressiveness, but I really don't think we can think of it as the same way as we think of personal income or property tax or property, transfer tax or something. I think it should be much flatter. Personally, I don't have the numbers for that, but I think more flat makes sense. And then the last thing I just want to say is that in the city council meeting, they got into the discussion with all three of the taxes about how the money would be spent. And, apropos to what we were talking about earlier in this meeting, I would advocate that but they keep in mind, top of mind, paying off the pension fund. And rather than going to, oh, well, this could fund a position there, or we could provide this service with that. And yes, and to the extent that those things are high priority and necessary, absolutely. But we were talking before, like we have to be the ones to say, hey, we made these obligations and we have to make good on those obligations. And I didn't hear a lot of that in the city council meeting about how these tax items would be spent. And so I think on all of these, we ought to bring that up as an issue. Thanks.
Thank you. And I'd like to go to public comment if there is any, and then I'd like to move us through the agenda. It is my goal to finish by 10 o'clock out of respect for everyone's health and well-being. So any public comment on this topic?
Yes.
Please go ahead. 3 minutes.
I am unable to unmute people. Thank you.
Hi, it's Jeremiah. So I actually used to work at Target when it first opened. I actually helped build all those shelves when it was just an empty floor. And so I started out as a TPS, which is Target Protection Specialist. So I stood in front of the doorway for 8 hours as a visible presence. Then I moved up to an APS, which is Asset Protection Services. And I was undercover, wearing plain clothes, walking around the store, catching all kinds of shoplifting. And I had installed video cameras for the employees in the back area because a lot of employees steal stuff. Anyway, the point is, I would walk around once the cash registers reached, I think it was 150 or 200,000 gross. I would escort the GSTL, and she would push around a secured rolling cart that was locked, and I would be next to her. We'd go to cash register, emptying it out, and then we would bring it into the money room. And they would count the money. But we reached 150,000, 200,000. I mean, it was early in the day. It was like around 1 o'clock. And so we emptied those cash registers a couple times a day. So they're grossing $500,000 a day. So I think that $10 million section is great because you got places like Taco Bell. Their drive-through is nonstop. I'm not sure if that is taxed. But we have a lot of businesses like Safeway and Sprouts. Actually, just want to give you an update. Safeway was going to go on strike today, but their contract was ratified and approved by Safeway. And so, moral of the story is, I was wondering why you go by half full people, because what if it ends up being a half of an employee, right? Part-time employee. What if you end up the total is 0.5? So I think we should have room for part-time employees. And that's it. Thank you. And Member Kerr, I just want to say thank you because you wanted to end the meeting for everybody's health and well-being. And that is so sweet.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Okay. Heather, you want to take us through the next report that you have under item 6.2?
Okay. Where am I? Oh, right. Okay. So we need to select the date for the next meeting. We are...
was there also a tax on
the EMS ALS?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have a report on that?
Yes, I can do that.
Okay, please, if you would.
So the EMS, emergency medical services, and ALS, advanced life support taxes were passed in different years for different medical EMS service, reasons. They have never fully funded the program. They were never necessarily supposed to fully fund the program. They were mostly to enhance the service that was being offered by the fire department. They, over the past few years, call volume has increased, and the fire department staffing level has stayed the same. And so it puts a strain on staff, and we are looking to add one additional person per shift. There are 3 different shifts at the fire department. This would allow for a reduction, hopefully in overtime, as the 6 person per shift that they currently have is the minimum staffing required for each shift. So if someone's on vacation, someone needs to come in from another shift to fill that vacancy, so on and so forth. And it would just really ensure that we can continue to make the, call time that we're making. The tax would also help alleviate the strain on the general fund. It would bring EMS closer to fully funded by this special tax. It would also ensure that EMS has a dedicated revenue source. So, this money could never go away. And it is one of the other things that council is looking to do is add a low income exemption and renter rebate, as well as change how the tax is being assessed from basically a flat fee per parcel, or for commercial, it's slightly higher, to a fee per square footage. I think they're moving towards land square footage, not building. I think that was where they landed on. So that is what they're looking to do. They're looking to combine the 2 taxes, make it more just, it is for EMS instead of, for the ALS was for specific, equipment and that kind of thing. So that's what they're looking to do.
Thank you for that report. I have no comments on this. Anyone else want to make any comments on that? Member Trainer? No. Member Halia? Yes, please, Francesco.
It says this is the ad hoc committee. Who is on the ad hoc committee?
Councilwoman Gary and Mayor Jordan.
Oh,
That's correct. Yeah. They presented at the council meeting on Monday.
all righty. And I'm kind of, I just want to understand how their numbers work. So what they're asking, they're not sure whether they want to do it on the land bill basis or per square footage. Is that correct? Or are they recommending one or the other?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
How is it on page 3, a more equitable basis, land basis, building basis?
He's recommending, or they ended up asking staff to bring a more detailed proposal forward for land basis.
And so it would be based on the plot area. So a 5,000 square foot lot would pay twice as much as a 2,500 square foot lot.
Correct.
Okay.
Member Priven, please.
Yeah, so I'm going to repeat myself a little bit, say it a little different. My concern is that we're going to set up a dynamic where we're going to ask the voters to approve a whole bunch of new taxes, and they're going to be great, and they'll say yes. And then 2 years from now, we're going to go, oh, by the way, we need this really big tax to pay off the pensions. And they're going to be like, what? We just passed 3 taxes or whatever. So I think I really liked, earlier in this meeting, in terms of like, we're trying to think of all the ways that we can generate revenue, and we're doing everything we can, but I'd hate to see it almost like a setup where the voters approve a lot of smaller measures and then get hit with the bigger measure unsuspecting later. That's all.
Member Trainer, thoughts?
My only question on the sum of all of these is how much additional revenue would these 3 proposed ballot measures bring per year?
So I honestly have no idea for the commercial vacancy tax. I think that is not something that we should rely upon. I mean, ideally, that is the type of tax that is looking to kind of weed itself out. And so I don't know anything about that at this point. We're working on putting an estimate together, but I don't have the information available yet. The business license tax would bring in approximately $200,000 more. The EMS and ALS, that would bring in, I'm trying to remember, because we're looking to have the new tax raise 1.9, but part of that is money that is already coming in other taxes. So I'd need to, let me pull up the report. Give me 1 second.
And on a net basis, it's going to entail hiring more people, right?
So that's part of it, is to bring in more people. It's also not for the general fund. I mean, yes, it's all for the city, but this is very specifically for EMS. So part of it is to be
but doesn't the city have to contribute general funds towards EMS because it's not currently self-sustaining?
That is what we are currently doing, yes.
So it would help us in that respect that we wouldn't have to dedicate general funds.
Exactly. And that's why I'm hesitating to say how much exactly it's going to bring in, because part of it is it's going to bring in a certain amount into the EMS fund, but the general fund will also have a benefit. And so I'm trying to figure out in my head how to phrase it. But
well, how much does the general fund have to contribute to make the EMS fund whole?
So over the last, I think, 5 years, it's averaged $500,000 a year. It's varied year to year from like 800,000 to 400,000. But it averages about $500,000 a year where the general fund is contributing. And part of the idea of increasing the tax is to make up that contribution in addition to adding the 3 new positions. And then also a small amount of equipment savings to fund those reserves that we were talking about earlier. So I think it's raising about $1 million. But because we added in the revenue from the other 2, I am not off the top of my head. But yeah, I'm pretty sure it's about $1 million additional revenue to the city.
Would there, Heather, I don't want to take us too much off the rails, but would there be a way to structure this tax so that any individual year that had a surplus in this revenue, in this fund, could then be written toward the pensions? We don't
Yes
carry that
and
over.
no.
No, that work account.
Well, yes and no. I mean, that would be a very specific thing.
We don't have to get into the details of that, but it was just a thought.
Yeah, I think it would be difficult to write that in. It's not impossible.
Okay. Any public comment on that report? Anyone else want to speak on this any further? Jeremiah, please unmute and speak for 3 minutes.
I don't. Oh,
Oh, he's showing up on my screen.
okay.
Well,
Can't hear you. Jeremiah, I still can't hear you. If you want to try to call in.
okay.
Okay, there you are.
Oh, thank you. Is this future agenda items? I got distracted.
No, we're still talking about the report on the EMS tax proposal from Heather. Did you have any comment on that?
Yeah, I was wondering if there's like state grants to subsidy or backtrack with, you know, the UC Berkeley paying some of that stuff from the calls to the village.
Okay. I'm still not hearing you very consistently. I think we're gonna.
For fire and it goes unpaid.
You're not coming in. I'd like us to move on ahead then. I apologize that we're not able to hear that public comment, but if he comes back in, we'll try to let him in again. So no, we are now at, I believe, future agenda items and then next meeting date, if I've got my agenda correct. So future agenda items, folks, anyone? I guess I'm hoping to hear from Member Trainer and Member Priven about their recommendations for investment strategies and a little report next time if we can get that.
So we're investigating and just currently sort of educating ourselves about the pension, the unfunded pension liability, and how all that works. So I think it would be good to put an agenda item on for us to just report on, you know, how we understand this. And it seems to me that it's just so complicated that maybe there's some sort of a, you know, keep it simple kind of presentation that that we could at least start to put together to help this committee understand it, and that maybe could be used to help educate the council and just the broader public on this.
That's a great idea. Okay, good. We'll do that.
Sounds good.
Other future agenda items?
The other thing I wanted to ask about was, weren't we going to talk about the audit results for the fiscal 21 year at some point? I see the audit is out there, but did I miss something? We never talked about that, did we?
We did not. It was supposed to be on this agenda, but because we had a short turnaround time for the tax measures, we put the tax measures on instead. And I needed to talk about the upcoming budget, which we sort of skipped a little bit, but it was in your memo. So we just didn't have time in this meeting to talk about the audit as well. I hope to put it on the Q4 agenda.
One of the issues that I've raised with council is the frequency of our meetings. And I do think that we are severely constrained by meeting quarterly. And at some point in time, we may need to make a recommendation to council that we meet more frequently than quarterly. But we are currently, that's our schedule. So that's what we're doing. So with that, the future agenda or the next meeting would be in.
We do have a public comment on.
Oh, is he back? Are we back?
Okay. His hand's raised.
Thank you. I'm just going to comment on future agenda items. And so I was requesting a future agenda item to be considered for a discussion on the pros and cons of the possibilities of creating a food bank in Albany, an Alameda County food bank within the city limits of Albany, and that Alameda County Food Bank can do food rescue from our local grocery stores like Target and Sprouts, Safeway, and all the excess food can be utilized by our senior citizens, by our families with school children, and low-income people. Just discussion on the pros and cons. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We will go ahead, please, Member Papaya.
I'd like to have a follow-up revenue subcommittee on select items, in particular, University Village, cannabis, and sports betting. If there's others, but we can discuss that.
Are you suggesting that in advance of sending recommendations to council with what we've already discussed, or do you want to hold off on that report? Or do you just want to keep talking about it?
Just as potentially that will, I don't know how, I'll stay on top of the information. I don't know whether, those three items could take further review, or do you think we're just going to pass that on to the council? I think
one way we could approach it would be to pass it to council as a report from us and then have them give us further direction as to whether they want us to do deeper dive.
okay.
Sound okay?
Yep.
All right, next meeting, Heather. What do you think?
Yes.
July?
Yes. I thought we had put a next meeting on there, but give me 1 second. There are only a handful of dates that are actually available. And so the one that we were hoping, and I had sent to the committee, and no one indicated that they couldn't make it. So give me 1 second.
We all should know this because we said we
I
could
think
do it.
it's July 26th.
26th, was it?
July 26th.
Okay.
At
Thank you.
7 in City Hall.
In person, okay. Assuming we're all healthy and happy and ready to resume in-person meetings. Okay,
Yes, July 26th at 7 o'clock.
thank you. And was there also an item for electing officers? And
There was, it is now, it's been a year, I guess. So it's time to elect a chair and vice chair. So
I'd like to nominate Vice Chair Trainer as chair for 2022, 2023, 2022, 2023.
I second it.
Have you accepted, Member Trainer?
Okay.
Okay.
You have to give me some tips on how to do this.
You've already done it once, it's okay. So we have a roll call on that then, please.
yes. If there are any tips, I'd like them as well. Okay. So Member Papalia,
Yes.
Member Priven,
Yes.
Member Trainer,
Yes.
and Member Kerr.
Yes.
All right.
And then for a vice chair, sort of naturally rotates to Mark Priven. Mark, would you accept a nomination for vice chair?
Excuse me, just have a question about that. So is there an expectation that the vice chair become chair? I'm asking partly because I believe the person who appointed me is going to get termed out of city council. So I'm not sure.
Well, I think we all get termed out.
Okay.
We all have to reapply for these positions with the new council.
It's a 2-year term, is that right?
Pretty sure that's the case, yeah.
I'm saying the person who appointed me will no longer be on city council.
Right, but someone else will. Yeah,
Okay.
I don't think you need to worry about that in the sense that if we do our jobs, which is a steep learning curve, I think our value, they're going to want to, often people keep people on who are, have the knowledge and background. This is not the kind of thing you want to have turnover on. So I wouldn't make that be part of your decision.
Okay.
that said, you're free to accept or decline the nomination as you wish. It's your choice.
I'll accept.
Yeah, I second it.
Okay. Roll call on that would be,
I have Member Papalia,
Aye.
Member Priven.
Do I abstain from this or?
You can say yes
Yeah.
or say no. I mean,
Yes.
okay. Member Trainer
Yes.
and Member Kerr.
yes.
Perfect.
And then Heather, just for point of clarity, this term would begin in the July meeting because of the calendar year ends, or the year ends June 30.
Sure.
Did I just make that up or is that true?
Honestly, I have no idea. The
I love
city
it.
clerk put this
Yes.
agenda item on, so I will confirm with her.
If you could and let us all know, and
Of course.
I'll do what I need to do.
Thank you.
All right, I believe we are ready for adjournment. Once again, I want to thank everybody for your participation and for the insights that you all have, and for your patience with the process, because it's a process. So we are adjourned, and it is 9:59.